This is F.D. Recovery, where we interview addicts and alcoholics.
Our aim is that through this podcast, we might help you on your journey of recovery.
Thank you for listening.
Hello, this is Frank with the F.D. Recovery, and you are listening to the Weekly Intention. We pick a topic and or spiritual principle. We talk about it and see how it worked in our recovery and work it in our week, right? Last week was Don't Quit, and this week will be Remaining Teachable. So let's do a little recap before we dive into remaining teachable or learning, right? Let's do a recap on Don't Quit. How did I work in my recovery, and how did I expand on it for the week? Well, we talked about it in the recovery meetings, and and in my my Friday with the boys at the rehab, and just to recap on kind of what I was working on it in my recovery, just like the basic tuning into that unshakable, that reliability within, and trying to hone in on that unbreakable spirit that I know that I have, and while at the same time, like, being okay with having broken pieces, right? And I know it's kind of an oxymoron, but that's kind of how it feels sometimes. Sometimes we feel unbreakable, and then other times when we reach lows, we feel broken, right? But it's all about the finishing move, right? It's all about how we finish. It's not about the stumbles and falls. It's it's about the whole process in between and getting towards our goals, right? For me, it's like just trying to enjoy every piece of it, not trying to, focus on either the destination or the outcome. It's just really important for me to just kind of focus on the process and understand that sometimes it sucks, and getting through that is the reason why, because in the end, when it's all said and done, the participation during that whole process is really going to define the kind of outcome you're going to feel in the end, right? Because in the end, it's all how we perceive it. It's, you could, if you're not seeing things right, you can have an awesome outcome to any situation and you still not be satisfied. So that's why it's super important to really calculate through it all how you're feeling, how you're tuning in, and how you're kind of embracing the whole process, because then you're not too focused on one thing or another. I don't want to say don't be goal oriented, right? That's very important. But the thing is don't fixate on certain pieces of the puzzle, because then you might miss the big picture. And when this whole don't quit aspect to it is, I was telling, my boys in recovery, right? The homies in recovery, that, for me, it's like I quit on myself so much that it became ad nausea, right? And just getting to that point where I don't give up on myself and seeing the outcome, just that personal power that I gained from that experience of just like not quitting on myself. It's like, that's a new one for me, is because for so long I just gave up on everything and just really never allowed myself to be the person that I know I am. And it's just embracing all that bad stuff within inside myself, and being that ugly person, and learning how to fix those parts of myself, and becoming a whole different person in that process, and be something very beautiful that you can kind of look at. Because before, when I used to look in the mirror, it was just a very ugly thing to me, and it wasn't. I'm not talking about physically. I'm talking about spiritually. Inside, there was just so much bad things that I was facing, and just I didn't have a very high reflection of self, and getting to this place where I don't quit on myself has allowed me to build that confidence within inside me to kind of face myself with a little bit more grace and allow myself to love again, right? And fall in love with myself during this whole process, because it's super easy to just kind of get on the doom and gloom train. But when we start like getting to that, when we start getting to that point where we're like, I think I can do this. I think I can trust myself again. I think I can love myself. Um, and then that starts to spread in other areas of your life, right? Getting to that self-care that not quitting gets you to is just it's just another plane, right? That we talk about how some of this stuff works, but the not quitting part of it, like staying on task and staying focused, is so important because it gives you breakthroughs that you wouldn't necessarily understand until you get to the end of that rainbow, right? Because um, we could all quit and take the off ramps on certain situations, but sometimes when that end at the end, you're like, whoa, I learned so much, and thank God I stuck with this, right? That's just my long-winded answer of just saying don't quit, stay on task, because it's really important that you just give yourself a chance. We could all do a little bit better in our recovery and in our life, right? This isn't just about drugs. It's about trying to live a spiritual way, right? And shifting over from don't quit, right? And I'm liking these little sayings, right? So remaining teachable, right? Remaining teachable, meaning, right? Remaining teachable. Let's see what Almighty Google has to say about and we're switching over to the new topic of the week, and the new, we'll say the new saying for the week: remain teachable. Remaining teachable is a continuous, humble, and open-minded posture of being willing to learn, unlearn, and relearn, regardless of one's current knowledge, age, or experience. It is a mindset that prioritizes growth over ego and actively welcomes new perspectives, feedback, and correction. Wow, I like that a lot. It is a mindset that prioritizes growth over ego. Oh, wow, that one hit a certain type of way because prioritizing growth over ego, man. I mean, my ego was the priority of everything, right? it was the way I operate and the way I see things, superficial, egotistical, right? And they're all connected in that narrow-minded, earthly, non-spiritual treasures, that we end up. Don't get me wrong, certain ego and material stuff on earth, it's not all bad, it's all how we participate in it. But for me and my ego, the way I participate in it is, it can be very possessive, or fixated, or neurotic, just getting to that where it's overbearing, where it becomes consumable rather than just something that should just add to my life, but I just want to end up, consuming it like it's a drug, and or some type of opiate, if that makes sense, right? To kind of numb myself, right? So I do, trying to open myself up and not allow the noise to take over, right? Because it's always been about ego for me, and prioritizing growth over ego while actively trying to correct yourself is just that wasn't a thing. None of that in that sentence was it didn't pertain to me for the longest time. And today I actively try to work on it, right? And core characteristics of a teachable person. First one, straight up, is humility, acknowledging that, right? Acknowledging that you do not know everything and that others can teach you regardless of their status. Right. Oh, that's a good one. Regardless of their status, right? So status implies that either they can be a different walk of life, or maybe even a subordinate at work, or somebody that maybe is not the same status as you at a job, whatever the case is, or even in the world of judgment, that's, superficial. That's where status gets involved, right? When you're dealing with ego, right? But that's important. No matter what our judgment is about a person, is still being able to understand that no matter where somebody's at on the perceived eco chain, or however you want to call it, like the food chain, it's like it doesn't matter. We can still learn from even you can learn from anybody. A homeless person on the street that we may judge can actually hold a nugget of wisdom that might help us reach to the next plane, right? So, openness to feedback, viewing criticism not as personal attacks, but as an opportunity for improvement and growth. Now, being defensive is the number one tool for the ego, right? Every time that I'm in defense mode, I realize that, oh man, I'm in my ego, and I'm participating in that whole how it looks game, as opposed to like how it really feels, and what it's really doing for me spiritually, right? Because for me, I realize a lot of my feelings, and I know that they're not facts, but you can take a quick assessment on how things, once you get a little bit more time under your belt and more spiritual teachings, your feelings can be the guiding system, in a sense, to like your intuition, and just the way things make you feel, whether, because like for me, if I'm in a situation that doesn't make me feel right, I know I'm not honoring my core tenets, right, and my core morals. So that's a very good thing to just kind of pay attention to. I'm not talking about feelings as like, oh, I got butt hurt and now I'm gonna just run on this emotion, and feel sadness and anger. That's part of life too, don't get me wrong. But what I'm talking about is that different feeling, that spiritual feeler, right? When you're in a situation that that either you don't need to be in, or it makes you feel uncomfortable. It could be with a girl, a guy, whatever it is. And if they're being off-putting or disrespectful, those are your little guidance systems saying, okay, maybe this conversation is something I need to either A, get out of, or B, maybe investigate a little further, because um, what is it about it that's bringing all this stuff up in me, right? So they're guidance systems, right? For me, it's like I got to pay attention to how everything is allowing me to allowing to take place in my mind and in my brain, right. We talk about people living rent free, and there's thoughts, there's situations that that live rent free in us constantly, and they kind of run the background. And so it's just important to kind of remain open to that, and understand, like, for the openness part, is like not taking things as a personal attack is super important, because me and my wife talk about this all the time, right? And going back and forth, going, hey, it's not a personal attack. And we talk about defensiveness sometimes. And we should be able to speak open and honestly to especially our loved ones, right? If we can't show these ugly things, or we can't correct each other and show the ugly parts to the people that are really close to you and love for you, and that really can just have your back through anything, then who can we, right? So it's important that we get vulnerable for the people around us. That's what vulnerability is. It's another way to look at openness, right? So opening yourself, allowing yourself to be vulnerable, and understand that it's an opportunity for improvement, man. It's when people give you criticism, and it depends on how it's delivered, right? So watch those people in your life. If you have to weed some people out based off their intentions, is super important. Obviously, if they communicate something else, but you need to do the self work and realize there's some just people that are just hurt, right? And they're trying hurt people, right? But it's also very important to investigate yourself first before we start labeling people as assholes, right? Most of the time, it's because I'm being too sensitive if I find myself butthurt about something. Usually, I got people in my life that aren't really trying to hurt my feelings. And if they do and they realize they're out of line, most of them kind of circle back and go, man, I was feeling this is what I was going through. And it usually solves itself with a simple conversation. That's why it's important, right? That openness goes much further than just criticism. It's just the openness allows us to get on the same page and just learn more about each other. So, the curiosity, that's next, right? Curiosity, maintaining a beginner's mindset and asking questions to understand rather than simply to reply. So, curiosity, that's a good outtake on it, right? I do say, when I was talking to the guys in rehab, and I hope you get curious enough about your recovery and what's going on inside you to investigate. And that, because that curiosity is just super important, especially when you're scratching the surface of what's going on inside you. It's like, you know, I, I just look at them and I say, I pray you get curious enough, right? Because I remember throughout my whole life, I just wasn't curious enough. I was like, whatever, dude, I'm blocked off to this information. Like, I didn't think anything was wrong. And then once I got enough pain in my life and enough consequences and enough spiritual things happening in my life where God was trying to change my mind, things weren't feeling right anymore, and I started gaining a conscience, a guilty conscience about things, and I'm like, wow, this is not the life I need to be living, and I got curious. I'm like, okay, I'm curious enough to now investigate what might be on the other side of what all these idiots are talking about, right? And that's what I really thought. I'm like, these guys are dumb. These guys are idiots. Well, turns out I was dumb and I was an idiot for a very long time until, and I don't mean that to be harsh on myself. I just say that playfully, but it really comes down to just getting curious enough to see what's behind all that pain, all that anger. For me, it was a big anger thing. Like, get curious, guys. Maybe you'll start investigating what the 12 steps are, what a sponsor is, what these meetings are, whether it's Project Heart, whether it's AA, NA, NEA, right? Go to any anonymous out there. And you just try things out. Go to church, connect with God, try all these paths, because it's, when you're playing around with spiritual concepts and stuff, like, or I wouldn't say playing, but when you're digging into these spiritual concepts, it's like, it's life is an open book. When you start messing with spirituality stuff, it becomes a kind of a cool little journey, right? And the next is willingness to change. Be adaptable and willing to change one's opinions or method based on new information. That means old out, and in with the new, out with the old, in with the new, right? So allow yourself to have that ebb and flow, right? Like a river, like rivers and creek all connect to some body of water. And it's very important that, because what happens if it, gets cut off, it gets stagnates. And we all know what happens with stagnated water, right? And a lot of bacteria grows in there, and eventually, well, you're left with the cesspool. So it's very important that we become connected to the river of life and just the river of information out there, of love and connection. And that's really what all this is just getting back to that flow of life, and just the beautifulness that life has to offer, right? I don't claim to be walking on clouds, but this is a fucking cloud compared to the sorrow and pain that I used to participate in, and all the hurt and all the anger I used to feel. So this is like my version of, what I used to go like, that's lame, right? This is my version of going, wow, this, what they said was absolutely true, and I was living on Anger Island, and I couldn't reach the bridge I couldn't reach Friendship Bridge, and and get down to the other side, because I was on Anger Island, right? And I was just isolated by all my past mistakes and all my traumas. And it just gets overwhelming. You can't do this alone, guys. So get curious enough, right? And understand that this is a lifelong journey, recognizing and learning, right? It's a constant journey. You're going to be you're going to be getting the education to the very end, right? There's no, we remain teachable by, honing in on some of these things, right? Being adaptable. And through it, you're going to gain so many strong relationships, right? um, because we learn from each other, right? We learn from other people. We learn from asking questions, being inquisitive, right? We learn from other people's knowledge, stories. Pick up a book, right? That's somebody's experience, whether even if it's fictional. I mean, that was in someone's brain, and it's very important that we enter this world of information, especially spirituality, and start getting connected and open, right? So, understanding the adaptability behind remaining teachable is also another key component to this. Is just being able to call it audible, right? When you're on some old information and going, wow, this is not serving me anymore. I need to search for something better. I can't tell you how many times I did that in my recovery. I'm like, this anger, this blowing up on my wife and, my loved ones, it's not working anymore, right? And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I have slip ups all the time, but they're far and few between, and they're getting a lot better, right? And I had one recent that was kind of my worst one in a long time, but it also brought me a lot of clarity and in understanding of what I need to do next time, so I don't get to that point anymore. Rest and spending a little bit more time with my family was, I tried to do that on Saturday, even though, my work schedule's all over the place. I made a little bit of time, and it's very important that we take the relationships in our life and we cherish them, right? And so let's see what else it has to say. Leadership development. Teachable people often become better leaders because they are not constrained by pride or the need to always be right. That's one thing I struggle with, right? Is the need to always be right. And maybe this will be a cornerstone of my week, is just, it's okay to be wrong, or it's okay to not even just correct people, right? So maybe that'll be a practice this week. I would love if you guys jumped in the comments and told me some of the things you practice on it, right? But yeah, I mean, and also getting to cultivate the teachable spirit, right? Active listening, practicing listening more than you speak, admitting mistakes, own errors without making excuses, challenging your assumptions, right? That's important, right? I assume a lot of things, but it's an all-encompassing thing. We talk about this whole spirituality, like, for me, it's like I didn't realize how in depth it was. And then when I started realizing, oh, this is in everything. It's not, I can't just pick and choose. Like, don't get me wrong, I like to skate by on bare minimum sometimes, because that's just what, especially if I'm in work mode and I got a whole lot of things going on, I'm stretched pretty thin. But above all, I have to stay on my practices. Don't get me wrong, I don't do them all perfect every time, but I still do them, right? And that's the most important thing we have to do, is staying on task, keeping in your routine. My physical health is very important to me nowadays. Before, I just used to go hog wild and just hedonistic, anything goes. Let's just see where the wind takes us. As much drugs as possible, as much gambling, as much fornication, whatever it was. And getting down to this spiritual life now, I'm like, I care what I put out in the world. I care how I participate. Before, it was just like, I want to hurt and just do whatever, and there's just there's no end to it, right? And getting to this place of where I start caring is a total 180. So I'm gonna end there, but just give yourself a chance with this recovery stuff. If you're out there struggling, just know that we got people in recovery that have a lot of love in their heart, and if you go to these meetings and give it a chance, you just might find your next best friend. You might find your wife, your next husband, whatever it is, right? You can make a whole new life in recovery. That's what I did. I was like, I needed to change everything. All my friends are in recovery. My wife is in recovery. Everything that I do is in recovery, because I want to stay in recovery. I realize what I need to do, and today it's to remain teachable, right? Let's wrap it up right there. So this week, let's remain teachable. Let's keep an open mind, doing the part of the how in there with an open mind, how it works, right? With that open mindedness, right? So I love you guys. Again, this is Frank with F.D. Recovery, and we're working on remaining teachable. All right, peace.
Thank you for tuning in to FD Recovery. A reminder, be kind to yourself on this journey of recovery. Also, call your sponsor, get connected to local support groups, and for one day at a time, stay clean and sober.